Marketing propaganda. What mass media, public relation firms, advertising, and terrorism all have in common, writes Nicholas Jackson O'Shaughnessy in Politics and Propaganda. They all possess a one-sided approach to communications that can be best thought of as a propaganda model. Trump won the presidency in 2016 not because he colluded with Russians, but because his propaganda was superior to his opponents. He used alternative facts to reach his audience, and using or misusing facts is a significant tenet of propaganda. Propaganda narratives are not necessarily meant to be taken literally. Instead, they represent fantasies we are invited to share. It is the nature of propaganda to reject the intellectual challenge and seek recourse in myth structures. For instance, the Nazi Party leaders relegated to the forgotten realm of myth have long ceased to be a real historical being, writes O'Shaughnessy. They now inhabit the demonic twilight of the entertainment world, the mass-produced collective subconsciousness within which Zulu warriors coexist with invaders from outer space and the Waffen-SS. Usually, propaganda does not often come marching toward us waving swastikas and chanting Sieg Heil. Its real power lies in its capacity to conceal itself, appear natural, and fuse completely and invisibly with the given society's values and accepted power symbols. Trump's propaganda was successfully disguised as patriotism. He used the patriotic myth to dramatize our prejudices and speak to something deep and even shameful within us. It articulated externally the things that were half-whispered internally. Questions of race, and especially white supremacy, lurk just below the American psyche. Trump's message attracted disgruntled white men and 40% of educated white women. He proved that it is much easier to appeal to emotion when one's cognition is underdeveloped. White men throughout history who find themselves in desperate situations use the myth of patriotism to unite their disenchanted followers, which remains a hallmark of propaganda. One of the Republican Party's favorite myths is that the U.S. Constitution enshrines the right for American citizens to bear arms, writes O'Shaughnessy. Fact-checking is also a patriotic myth used by white liberals. The Democrats began their fact-checking propaganda during the 2016 presidential debates. Trump was winning the propaganda war with patriotic rhetoric, but Kellyanne Conway, his leading propaganda analyst, said that political rhetoric is a different type of speech. Truth depends upon the situation, not whether something is or is not factual. Objective facts are irrelevant when propaganda is needed to convince the public, or such facts are subordinated to persuasive advocacy. We entered the alternative facts world in 2016, where propaganda was on par with truth. Propaganda bypasses critical thought and appeals directly to emotions. The holy trinity of propaganda is the use of myth, rhetoric, and symbols. Effective propaganda is always the synthesis and manipulation of all three. Trump's political analysts used myth, rhetoric, and symbols to defeat Hillary Clinton. Most importantly, he successfully dramatized our prejudices and offered poor whites a new vision of a world where they would not have to compete with non-whites because white privilege is their divine birthright. Propagandists use utopian myths to excite the people. Something within the psyche thirsts for utopia, which creates an illusion of a perfect or perfectible world order, writes O'Shaughnessy. An effective propagandist must develop real or make-believe narratives that appeal to one's emotions, wherein the realm of myth resides. The migrants dying on the southern borders functioned as a compelling myth for the Democratic Party. However, many are foolish to believe media oligarchs care for Latinos dying on our southern borders when they are responsible for creating the crisis. The Democratic Party propagandists exploited this human tragedy for political purposes. They attempted to bypass the cognitive realm and appeal directly to one's emotions, which is the core definition of propaganda. In doing so, they completely ignored all rational dialogue and were ready to match Trump's propaganda, bypassing their cognitive faculties and appealing directly to one's emotions. Trump is not irrational. Winning is all that matters in a propaganda democracy. The success of propaganda is unintelligent without recognizing that the persuasion strategy propagandists espouse in the main is emotional. Who can forget the little Syrian boy covered in dirt on CNN? Was the child a victim of the Syrian government's gassing program? One anchor cried over the air as she presented the story, but no journalist has ever wept in public for murdered black children. Emotion can be antithetical to critical thought and shut down the thinking process. The power of propaganda is largely the power of the emotional appeal propagandists exploit, like certain emotions such as fear and anger. Political power is maintained by addressing emotions, but symbols and slogans are the most effective mediums to transport propaganda. Who will ever forget Trump's slogan, "Make America Great Again"? We will remember it as the most successful propaganda slogan in U.S. history. Hillary did not stand a chance against propaganda designed to bypass critical thought. Patriotic propaganda sidesteps the cognitive processes and lodges itself directly into one's emotional center. Trump weaponized patriotic rhetoric and reached millions who were dissatisfied with neoliberalism. Political rhetoric is an essential skill possessed by mature politicians. Good rhetoric smolders in the mind and uses obfuscation as its objective. It relies on repetition and the overuse of ambiguous terms and phrases, such as "no clear proof" or "collateral damages," writes O'Shaughnessy. Propaganda typically misuses terms and phrases. Its bastardization distorts perception, detaching people from reality. For instance, 1 million people died from George W. Bush's war in Iraq. When Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld was asked about these numbers, he said they kept no such records of collateral damages. Propaganda disconnects the public from those victimized by violence by rebranding and justifying acts of violence. The Trump strategists successfully used patriotic myths, which are the sound of a culture's dialogue with itself, which expresses the key values of a society in story form. Trump hustled a more effective myth than his contenders and was on track to win in 2020. On the other hand, the Democrats disregard the power of myth. At the same time, most Americans accept these stories of origin as sacred, which is why many believe the patriotic myth protects American values. Trump presents himself as the savior of these values and would not allow the God-hating liberals to destroy America. The destruction of a nation's myths places the entire society in jeopardy. Myths are fundamental to a nation's stability. Propaganda myths are essential for properly functioning and uniting a community around an idea. The core methodology of propaganda has been creating and sustaining myths, which are fluid and can be created, fabricated, resurrected, and the art of propaganda is to do this, writes O'Shaughnessy. The Trump strategists tap the patriotic myth to promote white supremacy. Successful strategists utilize myths and symbols to influence public opinion. For example, the MAGA slogan was a masterful myth symbol and attracted the attention of millions of disgruntled white Americans. The symbol embroiders, simplifies, or resurrects myths and is capable of endless duplication. A slogan symbol like the swastika or MAGA eludes precise scrutiny and creates possibilities of multiple interpretations. For instance, Trump's use of the symbol carried multiple messages. He mastered language in all its complexities, including his use of vulgarity. Language is also a symbol and can be reinvented and endowed with new meaning. Propaganda thrives on deceit and forgery. Unfortunately, all Americans partake in the lies told by politicians. We do not know what happened on September 11, 2001. Most Americans have no idea what the government is doing in their name worldwide. American citizens are not allowed to ask questions of their government without being accused of being anti-American. Therefore, millions of people self-censor, which is a violation of human rights. It is the worst form of political manipulation and is a frontal attack against human dignity. Censorship excludes and insults those who still believe America is a democratic nation. Propaganda cannot exist without the continuous creation of enemies. America has spent most of its short existence fighting enemies at home and abroad. It has never had a prolonged rest period and remains a war nation. Enemies are necessary for the successful functioning of all propaganda democracies. The creation of enemies is not something that happens. Instead, it gives coherence and definition to our values and motivates us to act. They provide someone to blame, Trump, Putin, when things go wrong. Propaganda is the most potent marketing strategy. It is a type of political marketing to maintain the illusion of democracy. What in marketing is selling, in schools is teaching, in the church is proselytism, in politics is propagandizing, in the military is indoctrinating. Propaganda is mass suggestion, and its targets are the multitudes, which distinguishes it from persuasion, writes O'Shaughnessy. Was Trump's propaganda effective because he spent more money than his opponent? According to the Washington Post, Hillary spent twice as much money. The Clinton campaign spent $768 million compared with Trump's $398 million. Trump mastered the skill of manipulation. A propagandist must be skilled in the misuse of information, especially in withholding relevant facts from the public. One must be deliberate and systematic in influencing perceptions, manipulating cognitions, and direct behavior to achieve a response that serves the desired intent of the propagandist. Propaganda is the language and medium in which politics communicates to the citizens. Propaganda is a language, most easily a slogan, but perhaps a white paper, a manifesto, an editorial, a book, which influences the false doctrine or serves a false ideology, writes O'Shaughnessy. Hillary's political strategists controlled the media, which is the most effective propaganda medium, but did not use it as effectively as the Biden team, who resorted to demagogic propaganda. Of course, the Biden strategists did have the crisis to hide behind, and they unleashed BLM to cause chaos and destruction throughout the country. This implanted fear into millions, and they voted Trump out of office to prevent the ongoing violence in the streets. On the other hand, the Clinton strategists lacked the necessary skills to guarantee her success. Their misuse of propaganda was responsible for her demise. An influential political strategist works behind the scenes to guarantee their candidate's success before entering the race. They use unsavory methods to communicate a point of view, with the ultimate goal of the recipient coming to accept this position as if it were his own voluntarily. Propaganda analysts require the savviness of a Christian televangelist who pleads for a donation. Of course, they need the money to conduct the Lord's work. However, the audience must feel they have an interest in the request. Something must be in it for them, and by donating money to the work of the Lord, they will, in turn, receive 100 times the amount they gave. Or, if they are sick, they will receive healing in exchange for their giving. These persuasion techniques must be part of the political analyst's arsenal, and the appeal to one's emotions must become the political strategist's Rosetta Stone. The future of the Democratic Party looks grim. The media oligarchs have placed Biden in power, but after him, who? The party failed in 2016 because they were uncoordinated with Black and poor communities. They ignored the basic needs of poor Americans but were able to weaponize BLM and the 2020 crisis to deflect attention from their no-message platform. White liberals do not value African Americans, and they ignore them after every major election cycle. The late Herman Cain was correct in stating that African Americans are brainwashed. Why else would they vote for a party that provides them nothing in return? For instance, millions of African Americans voted for Biden while knowing he sided with Southern racists throughout his lackluster political career. African American support for white liberals speaks to the deep programming of the Black psyche. However, we should not blame African Americans for being brainwashed. They did not program themselves for self-destruction, but were victims of a vicious form of propaganda. Unfortunately, President Joe Biden and Congressman Jim Clyburn will continue to receive support from the community regardless of their disdain for Black life. Clyburn appears possessed by white demons. What else could explain his uncritical support of Biden? He is imprisoned in an ongoing slave mentality form which few have freed themselves. Unethical white liberals and compromised black politicians will continue to receive uncritical support from the community because they are programmed for self-destruction. The programming of the black psyche has contaminated their thinking. Millions cannot think outside the plantation confines that kept their ancestors in bondage. Only a more potent form of propaganda or vicious tragedy may awaken some from the spell. An awakening will prove difficult, if not miraculous, since most black Americans continue to ingest the same propaganda fed to Clyburn. For example, the acceptance of violence in the black community has been normalized. If at least one or more people are not murdered every night on the streets of Philadelphia, something has gone awry. Violence has become the norm in most major black cities, and its acceptance is the most sinister form of propaganda. Violence does not just happen by itself, writes O'Shaughnessy. Violence aims at behavior modification, mass incarceration, by coercion. Propaganda aims at the same persuasion. Terrorism is a combination of both. Violence is a metaphor for terror. The metaphor is used to depersonalize its victims. Only the words Muslim or Palestinian share a similar pathology with African Americans, words synonymous with non-being. Knowledge of metaphors and their usage is essential. Hitler's book, Mein Kampf, functions as a metaphor, organized around a medical diagnosis and cure. The religious rite of guilt and redemption, and the drama of murder-revenge, writes O'Shaughnessy. Another propaganda medium is the manufacture of visual images. Symbols are unwritten language, like the words Muslim, Palestinian, and African American, that automatically conjure an image. Ideas are unconsciously attached to language and remain long in the psyche, even after being replaced with politically correct jargon. The German philosopher Martin Heidegger wrote, "Language is the house of being." Propagandists use language that bypasses criticalness and lodges itself into one's affective domain. Language has limitations, but symbols are the most powerful medium for communicating ideas. Still, language is an effective tool for controlling and manipulating the public. For instance, according to O'Shaughnessy, modern English is permeated by the buried metaphors of capitalism. Once we have assessed the debit and credit sides, we exploit opportunities, profit from experiences, and cash in on situations. We sell clever ideas and refuse to buy the opinions of those with whom we disagree. Pop singers and politicians may become hot properties once they have been taught to capitalize on their talents. Hitler preferred the spoken word over the written. He was critical of educators who placed writing before language. The power which has always started the greatest religious and political avalanches in history, said Hitler, has from time immemorial been the magic of the spoken word and that alone. The strategic use of language is critical for political success. Hillary limited her chances of winning by underestimating the power of speech. When speaking to Wall Street executives, she presented herself as one of them. On the other hand, while talking to the ever-shrinking middle class and working poor, she was unsuccessful at conveying her husband's words, "I feel your pain." Hillary did not seem authentic. At least not enough people believed her. The ability to appear believable is the hallmark of propaganda. Political strategists aim to persuade a target group to identify with them. Therefore, we, politicians, must speak to the people in their language. No politician in American history has spoken as persuasively as Trump. His masterful use of rhetoric is still effective and feared by neoliberals. The Democrats have yet to master the use of this sinister art form. Some believe Trump is a ticking time bomb because of his disregard for cordial speech. However, rhetoric cannot be confined but is like an unguided missile. One has little control of how it is conscripted or duplicated. Good rhetoric fizzles and smolders in the mind, writes O'Shaughnessy. Trump told a better story in 2016 than Hillary. Narrative is the primordial mode of communication. It is a way of telling a story that telegraphs meaning without explanation. Trump also mastered the slogan symbol, the most effective nonverbal channel for conveying a political message. On the other hand, Hillary missed an opportunity to use a more feminine form of propaganda and lost over 40% of educated white women. She did not use the appropriate language to attract enough of them to believe in her. The feminization of rhetoric is the preferred medium of our time. Rhetoric preferences and mandates the articulation of feelings. In contrast, a manly style is a noose. The ancient world, metaphors were drawn from battles, but now rhetoric of courtship is employed, and public discourse has been personalized, writes O'Shaughnessy. Good political rhetoric will always be successful under most circumstances. Only if certainty is demanded does rhetoric fail.